Hello, and thank you for listening. This is the Vietnam Voices series. It is September 11th, 2015, and I am joined in studio today with someone who's going to be a familiar face for many, many people, Dave Rye. He is going to share with us today his Vietnam recollections. And Dave, I really appreciate you coming in and joining me.
I appreciate you doing the series. Thank you very much.
You bet. My pleasure. Dave, let's talk about, let's start at the beginning. Let's start before your service career. Where was home? What were you doing before?
I was born in Norfolk, Virginia, because my dad was in the Navy, and that's where a huge Navy base was and is. That was during World War II. Lived in Iowa till I was 8. My dad got a job in Billings, and that sounded like the end of the world to my mother, who was from Michigan. But I grew up in Billings. Graduated from Billings Senior High in 1962. Went to Lawrence College in Appleton, Wisconsin for a year. Got homesick for Montana, because by then my parents had moved to Minnesota. Transferred to the University of Montana, paying out-of-state tuition.
That had to gripe you just a little.
But happy to do it.
Right.
Happy to do it. Wanted to come home. That's where my friends were. So didn't go there for a good academic reason. But, I was planning on teaching high school English for a living. I majored in English. And somebody who worked at a radio station met me and thought I had a voice that belonged on the radio.
You do have a very good voice.
So thank you. Okay. Just for a lark, I became a disc jockey. And one thing led to another. And I went from disc jockeying to radio talk show host to eventually television. All the time, usually being offered the job. I didn't seek them, they sought me, which was a real blessing. But by the end of my college career, I thought I'd found my calling in life, the broadcasting. I loved doing it. It was lots of fun, and it was mentally stimulating as well. So eventually decided to take a quarter off from college.
I think I've heard this story
you can tell
before.
What's coming next?
Right, and what year was this when you decided?
1967. I got drafted.
Okay.
I was a few credits short of a college degree, but
okay.
I decided just to sit out a quarter and just do broadcasting full time, and that led to my getting drafted.
So that's when they knew. But I like I said, I've heard this story before. So as soon as you dropped, you got a letter in the mail.
Sure.
What did it say? Do you remember?
Greetings.
Greetings.
I remember that's how it always started. And one of your other interviewees mentioned Margaret Ward, who was the local draft board person. Her signature was on every draft card issued, I think, in Billings for about 20 years or so. But I just remember it said, greetings, your friends and neighbors have selected you to serve the country. They put the best possible spin on them.
Right, your friends, and you wanted to...
the ultimate bad news.
Right,
right.
You wanted to know who those friends and neighbors were so that you could go and talk to them.
Yes, indeed. So I got orders to report for induction in Butte, and this was a time of great civil unrest, as you probably have read. You're not old enough to remember it, but my college roommate, in fact, and I both got drafted at the same time. He went to Canada and lived the rest of his life there. We just disagreed on the proper course of action to take, and pretty much agreed to disagree. I'd see him occasionally after President Carter's first act was to pardon Vietnam draft resistors. Right. He would come back to the States occasionally, and I'd visit him in Canada occasionally. And my parents, who were real old school, World War II vet, couldn't understand how I could maintain the friendship.
Yeah.
But I could. We just had different points of view, and going in the service was the right thing for me to do, and it was the wrong thing for him to do. At least he thought so. So.
Mm-hmm. You got that notice, and what did you think? Were you expecting?
I thought I could get killed.
Yeah.
This was serious stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought I had a mindset that wasn't militarily capable. Back then, land-grant colleges had to required ROTC for 2 years for its male students. The deal was you took ROTC mandatorily for 2 years. Then you had the choice of whether or not to continue and get a commission upon graduation or not. I took the 2 years and chose not to. No, I wasn't happy about it. And as I'll explain later, it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me for lots of reasons.
But you didn't think you had the mind. When
no,
you said you didn't have the mindset, what do you mean?
I didn't think I had the macho qualities to be a soldier, put it that way. I didn't feel like having somebody else control my life, which of course is what happens when you're in the service. No, it was bothersome, but
Yeah.
I just decided to. And I had thought about enlisting. The problem with enlisting is that you were committed to at least 3 years if you were in the Army. I think the Navy required 4, and the Marines required at least 3. The Air Force required 3. Whereas if you got drafted, it was only 2 years, and then you're a civilian again. So I decided to take my chances with the draft.
Okay.
So I did.
And when you said that that you're old school family, what did your father, who was in the military, what did he think?
He was not real happy about it. He would have preferred that I stay a civilian, but you know, he thought that was considered in those days part of a young man's duty to his country to be in the military for a couple of years. And we talked about everybody having a military obligation, and every able-bodied male presumably had that, unless they were conscientious objectors, you know, or physically disabled in some way or another.
Right.
But that was just standard. How are you going to fulfill your military obligation?
Right.
You know,
it's just part of what you
part of growing
part of your
up,
duty.
part
Yeah.
of being a male U.S. citizen. So I decided to make the best I could of it, and do the best I could at it. So it was 8 quick weeks at Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training, and having drill sergeants yell at me all the time.
What was that like? Did at least in basic, did it live up to your expectation that you're not going to?
Lived up to all the hype on television of people being in your face and yelling at you all the time. But you should learn to change your habits. It makes you have to be self-disciplined, or you're going to be disciplined by outsiders. So the best thing to do is learn how to be self-disciplined. The best thing to do is learn to be organized and have things done on time, and to do them the way they're supposed to be done, even if the way they're supposed to be done strikes you with your civilian mindset as being incredibly petty. You know,
Yeah.
the proper way to make a bed, for example, you know, the proper way to clean a sink, all that stuff.
You learn, so they really break you down,
They do break you
even to
down.
very, very basic.
Right, but the idea is to make you, it's to change your mindset from civilian to military.
Okay.
Okay, and it doesn't mean make you an automaton. It means to make you alert and capable of following orders, and ultimately capable of giving them if you're in that position, and to be effective at your job and what you do. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Our meeting today was supposed to be at 2 o'clock. Okay, I was here a few minutes early.
Yep.
On purpose. When I was a civilian before that, I was always a few minutes late for everything. Everything was casual. Okay, I pictured somebody yelling in my ear, 1,400 hours means 1,400 hours, not 1,401, maggot. You know, that kind
Right.
of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So that's one of the enduring
right.
characteristics.
Sure, for sure. Anyway, to carry on with the military thing, of course, if you're drafted, you have no choice as to what your MOS, military occupational specialty, will be. It's where you're needed. I expected to be in the infantry, because that's where they needed the cannon fodder, if you want to put it that way. To my surprise, I got artillery, which was strange because math was always my worst subject in school. I think it was probably what I was worst at on the tests they give you when you get inducted. But I got artillery, which requires a lot of math and some science.
And you want to be an English teacher.
Oh yeah, right. I didn't even know what artillery was exactly.
Right.
So 8 weeks at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, learning all there is to know about artillery and firing 105 millimeter howitzers. and to no one's surprise, my orders were for Vietnam.
Right.
After that. So we got a 30-day leave and off to Vietnam.
What was your 30-day leave like? What did you do?
30-day leave.
Because it seems like
Actually, I
something's
was
hanging
seeing
over your
all
head.
the friends I hadn't seen for a long time, with the knowledge that I could well be dead within a year. And this might be the last time I saw them. I also made the mistake of having a whirlwind romance, which led to a whirlwind engagement with someone I had just met during the leave.
Wow.
Marriage would have been a disaster, which we both realized later. But you know, at the time I thought, well, I don't want to die without getting married and having kids and
Right.
all the stuff that are part of a normal adult's life. But it came to my senses later, and happily so did she.
Right. So you're 23, 22?
I was 23
Okay.
when I got drafted. I celebrated, in quotation marks, my 24th birthday in basic and my 25th birthday in Vietnam.
So was the 26th better?
26, I was out, yes. Yeah, it was out. So got to Vietnam. I remember getting off the plane and thinking I had never felt such a combination of heat and humidity in my life. Just overwhelming. And as we were leaving the plane, we got a huge cheer from a whole lot of troops on the ground. Can you guess why we got the cheer?
They
were the ones who were going aboard the plane.
Right.
That was the Freedom Bird, capital F, capital B. We were their replacements, and that's why we got the rousing cheer.
So what are you thinking? Not only is it hot and humid here, but what are you thinking just in general about?
I'm thinking it felt strange. We boarded a bus, and the bus had iron cages around all the windows in case anybody threw a grenade at us or something like that. We had about 5 ARVN, Army of the Republic of Vietnam, policemen behind us, on motorcycles, and about 5 in front of the bus. They took us to a place called the 90th Replacement Company, where we filled sandbags with dirt for a couple of days until we found out which unit we were assigned to.
Okay.
So I got assigned to my unit. And
what unit did you serve?
the unit was the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, which is not part of any division. It's separate and light. And I was part of an artillery. It's mostly infantry, but I was part of its artillery unit.
Okay.
We were the people they'd call if they were pinned down or needed artillery help or something like that. So the unit routinely moved about once a month, just like a MASH unit would.
Okay.
So we were in various places, but always in the Mekong Delta in what's called 4 Corps.
Okay.
So anyway, I learned more about artillery than I ever wanted to know.
Right.
But
was it hard for a guy who maybe eschewed science or math?
yes, I wasn't good at those.
Right. Was it hard, or was
It got even stranger. They decided that since they looked up the personnel records, and it said civilian education 16 years. Didn't say I was a college graduate, just because I wasn't. I had a few credits left to go, but said 16 years. That we'll put him in the Fire Direction Center, which is the people who translate location into numbers for the artillery, called quadrant and what else, deflection,
right,
and azimuth. You have to determine all those things and then bark out instructions to the guns, people on the guns, as to where to aim them and how to set them and all that, and then they fire. And you have to learn how to do it in a hurry because oftentimes it's under duress.
Yeah.
So anyway, 3 months in country, 3 weeks in country, I got wounded, and it was not heroic.
Okay.
That people say, "Oh, you got a Purple Heart, you're a big hero." I was asleep. We got mortared about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
I woke up, and we were all assigned a hooch, which we had to build ourselves. It was made out of steel covert with sandbags surrounding it. Usually we'd filled the sandbags ourselves before that.
If you want a place to sleep, you build it.
You build a hooch. So I was sleeping at 2 o'clock in the morning on my stomach, apparently, and suddenly I heard incredible explosions, and we were getting hit, and getting hit really hard. So I ran to the Fire Direction Center, and someone said, "Hey, you're bleeding." And I was bleeding from the back of my neck, and I was bleeding from my arm. I'd been hit by mortar shrapnel. I just didn't know that at the time because I was so, obsessed with the other stuff that was going on. 2 of our guys were killed that night. They medevaced me, put me on a helicopter, and took me to a medical unit, where I had my first real taste of war because one of our cooks, whom I recognized, was lying on a gurney with his legs blown off. That's an image that never goes away.
Yeah.
Never goes away. Stuck with me the rest of my life. And some people were saying, "Hey, Brownlee gets to go home." Well, that's a heck of a way to have to go home.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who was killed had just come back from an R&R in Bangkok, a rest and relaxation week, and told me about his wonderful time. And 24 hours later, he was dead. So that brought the war home in a big way. So about it seemed like once every couple weeks we'd get hit at night. We never knew when it would be. If you've got a civilian mindset, it takes some getting used to think, there are people out there who want to kill me.
Right.
They don't even know me.
Right.
What have I ever done to them?
Right.
What I did to them from their point of view was invade their country.
Right.
I understood where they were coming from. I guess I could say one of the complaints I had about my fellow soldiers sometimes was that they tended to lump Vietnamese into one group. You know, we knew that people who were friendly to us by day were the ones who were trying to kill us by night, but not all of them.
Right.
You know, and you didn't know which ones, of course, obviously, but there were some who just developed, I'd say, a bias against all Vietnamese people, and that's too bad. We were there to help one segment of the Vietnamese people.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. When you were taken back medevac to remove the shrapnel, then
Yes.
redeployed.
Right. Oh yeah, it didn't take long. Just took 3 weeks. Actually, they always had radios on every place we went. Armed Forces radio was all pervasive, and while I was in the hospital, I heard Lyndon Johnson announce that he would not seek re-election that year. So I can always pinpoint the date that he made the announcement and the day I was wounded, which were March 31st, 1968. Yeah. So.
What did you think when you heard Johnson's announcement?
I didn't really know. You know, a lot of people my age were always saying, you know, that the darned establishment or the older generation, and we're the generation of love and peace, and we'll change the world. And now it's been a generation and a half since then, and we haven't changed it except for the worst sometimes. But, you know, I wasn't, you know, I thought a change of leadership would probably be a good idea. But
right.
At the same time, I didn't blame my parents' generation for sending me there. The U.S. had hardly ever fought a war with territorial ambitions. We'd never tried to take over a country. I guess we took over the Philippines for a while around the early 20th century, but generally we didn't have territorial ambitions, and our ambition in Vietnam was to stop the spread of communism, which we thought would be for the benefit of the South Vietnamese people. We weren't trying to take over the government, and at the time, the domino theory sounded plausible. It maybe doesn't now.
Right.
You know, we lost Vietnam, and somehow the world didn't become communist after all. So, in fact, communism fell 24 years later. But so at the, you know, just mixed feelings all the way around. Your primary goal, if you're in a war, is to live through it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Do what you can.
Did you 3 weeks of recovery? What's that like?
Well, I didn't. It was more like 3 days.
3 days,
recovery,
okay.
And then back to your unit.
Okay.
Oh, even after it, I remember the commanding general of my unit made the hospital stops and shook all our hands and, you know, told us to hang in there and that kind of thing. And I wasn't hurt that badly. I had some shrapnel on my arm and some of the back of my neck, but wasn't hard to remove. A couple scars remain, but. Anyway, within a couple days, they had me sweeping floors around the bed, so I wouldn't be bored, I guess.
Right. I imagine it'd be easy to get bored in that situation.
No. Anyway. Oh, well, you're either bored or scared all the time.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I developed a cigarette habit, which took me decades to break. I've broken it now, but partly it was because you're nervous or bored all the time. Smoking relieves that.
Right.
And at the time, they included free packs of cigarettes with the C rations, which we thought, gee, what a nice thing for the tobacco companies to do. What they were doing was getting us addicted, you know, which,
yeah.
Anyway.
What did you, so going back, was it harder going back after you're wounded to go right back into it?
Nah, not really. No, by then I knew some of the guys in my unit and so forth. But I'll jump ahead a little bit. I'm probably taking too much of your time.
No. This is
about 2 months later. Somebody messed up an order or something, and there was an opening for a battery clerk in the rear area where our headquarters was officially. So. Again, they looked at the personnel sheets and saw that my civilian education said 16 years, and most people in the enlisted ranks who are not officers, you know, had far less than that. But the average draftee was only a high school graduate, if that. So they said, "Hey, we have an opening for a battery clerk. You look like just the type who might be able to do it." So I went back to the rear area and trained for about 2 weeks, and I made a point of getting as good at that as I possibly could in as short a time. So I became expert at it. So a couple months later, I became the official battery clerk.
Okay.
So I was the guy who typed a lot of reports and did morning reports and, you know, sorted the mail and still go out to the field occasionally in a helicopter and give guys their mail every day.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing. But and in a rear area, we still got rocketed or mortared maybe once every month.
Okay.
But that sure beats once every couple weeks.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd much rather type than I would kill people.
Yeah.
And I'd really rather type than get killed.
Right.
So
yeah. Well, and probably than doing math.
yeah.
Too.
So I got good at it. And the amazing thing about this was what's called an E5 slot. Mm-hmm. Okay, the enlisted ranks go 1 through 9, and you go to Vietnam normally as an E3. Gee, I would have taken forever to get promoted to E4, and I got promoted to E5 in a hurry. So, you know, I got promoted faster and made more money for typing than I would have for the grunge work, the really tough to bear stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got really good at it, and I did that the rest of my tour. In fact, I extended my tour for a month and a half because I waited to see what my reassignment orders are, and they said Fort Polk, Louisiana. And guys who'd been at Fort Polk said, we like it better here. That's a real hellhole.
Wow.
Wow. So the Army had a policy then that if you got back from Vietnam with 140 days or fewer, you got discharged rather than reassigned. So I waited for my reassignment orders, and I still had 181 days, I think, so I extended my tour for an extra 41 days, which is
just enough to get you
kind of the ultimate gamble, you know,
right.
Gambling your life in a way, but to get out of the Army early. But I did. It worked out. So I was there for 14 months instead of the standard 12.
What do you remember? So you're down in the Mekong Delta. It's hot. It's humid. What are the sights and smells, the sensory kind of things that you remember beyond that?
Oh, golly, sights. Lots of water buffalo. Lots of rice farmers, rice paddies. Friendly people in the daytime, always waving at the troops as we go by in trucks or things like that. I remember Saigon itself, which we went through a lot, smelled like fish all the time. There must be, I suppose people were catching fish all the time and selling them on the market or something like that.
Right.
So I remember the city smelling mostly like fish and kind of musty other than that. I remember women with the conical hats and the national uniform, which was called an ao dai. That's A-O, new word D-A-I. I guess the strange thing is if you talk to Vietnamese people, you were mixing 3 languages. French, because of the occupation of the French back in the 40s and 50s and maybe earlier than that. Some English, and of course Vietnamese. So I'll give you an example. If you tell someone, you buku dingy dai, the French word is beaucoup, but
right.
They'd change it to buku. You buku dingy dai, you English, buku French, dingy dai crazy.
Right.
Okay, you're very crazy. And normally they'd rate you on an extreme scale. If they liked you, you were number 1, and if they didn't like you, you were number 10. You're number 1, or you number 10, you know, that kind of thing. It was usually trying to bargain with you on something or other that gets you to buy something. You know, I remember the strange aspect of marijuana being available in regular cigarette packs. I didn't care to indulge in that. That was a countercultural thing that I wasn't personally into, but it was available. Saigon was a huge, crowded city, very few cars, a whole lot of motorbikes. The Delta itself was, from the air, spectacularly beautiful. From a helicopter, beautiful. Green, rice paddies, all that. Well-meaning, nice, but impoverished people.
Yeah.
I liked them.
Yeah.
I know they were the ones who might have been trying to kill me at night, but I sure liked the ones I ran across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you're taking this also, and you'd been on TV. You're a reporter.
Uh-huh.
Did any of that civilian? You talk about the difference between a civilian and an army. Did the civilian brain ever kick in and say, from a journalistic perspective, this is pretty interesting?
Oh yeah, all the time. I thought it was fascinating, but then it turned out I thought the Army was fascinating.
Okay.
The rules and regulations all had a reason, even if they seem nuts to you when you're first exposed to them. It was journalistically interesting that if you're in the military, at least then, you met every conceivable kind of American male. You know, black guys from ghettos in New York City to southern rednecks from Alabama to guys from yuppies from California. There were lots of those. Farm boys from the Midwest, and you were all put together in one unit, and you all had to get along. And after a while, we all started not only liking each other, but understanding each other. It was a real melting pot of Americana. I thought that was fascinating. So from a journalistic standpoint, and seeing a different country was fascinating. I also got to see Taiwan and Singapore, so a short time in each place.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about when you went over there, and you couldn't have helped but been in the media and not realize now. 67, it's building. Some of the public sentiment is turning.
Yeah.
Not uniformly, but it's turning, and politically this is becoming a problem.
Yeah. The hard thing was 1968, which was my year in Vietnam, and it seemed like, from my standpoint of reading Stars and Stripes every day, or listening to AFBN radio, which was probably censored at the time, it seemed like back in the world, which is what we call the U.S., things were going nuts. The whole world was going crazy. Martin Luther King was assassinated 4 days after I was wounded in April. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in June. The Democratic National Convention in late July went nuts with rioters on the streets of Chicago. The musical Hair kicked in that year with nude performers on stage, and I thought, all this Norman Rockwell bourgeois 1950s America I had grown up in, and Billings was a good example of that, is disappearing. It's going nuts. I really thought back in the world things were worse than they were, because what makes the news, of course, is oftentimes it's sensational.
Yeah.
And in my news career, people would say, how come you always just do bad news? And the reason is because the normal is okay.
Right.
Most of the time,
Yeah.
I use the example, if a kid walks to school safely and then walks home safely, that's not news. If he gets hit by a bus, that's news.
Right.
Okay, but it's what's a departure from what's normal is what's news.
Yeah.
But what was making the news then was so bad and so seemingly consistently bad. I worried about what was going on.
Yeah.
By the way, reading the Stars and Stripes, every day there was a casualty list. Who died, who got killed. One day I looked down the list, always hoping never to see anybody I knew, and it was my next door neighbor as a kid on Avenue D in Billings, a guy named Steve Melnick, a year ahead of me in school, brilliant guy, went to the Air Force Academy, wanted to be an astronaut, was killed in Vietnam. A couple months later, it was a guy named Dan O'Neill from Butte, college fraternity brother, good friend. So those kind of things bring it home. Plus, in my own unit, I think we had 4 guys killed the year I was there. So it's, and they're all people you've talked to or gotten to know.
And you're having a conversation.
Having a conversation. In one case, there was a young widow and a young child. It's very heartrending.
Yeah.
It gets to you.
You see in a very real way the personal cost of war.
Yeah.
By the person. What do you miss about? So you're at home. Your home to you is Missoula.
By then it is, yeah.
But what do you miss about Montana, or what do you miss about the real world?
Montana is a place where everybody's a neighbor. If you live here long enough, you can go to any town practically in the state and have coffee with somebody else. We're not all alike. We're diverse in terms of the kinds of people we raise here. No stereotype is accurate, but having a population of about 1 million, and at that time probably 800,000, is a blessing. We don't have the urban problems. It's just a special place. I even think the weather is a help. In my year in Vietnam, it was monsoon season half the year and dry half the year, but always hot and always humid. Here we have 4 distinct seasons, and I kind of like it that way.
Yeah.
A lot of people my age winter in Arizona these days, and they'll invite me to come down and stay with them. I could probably freeload for a couple months if I wanted to, but I don't like winter, but I like summer a lot better than I would otherwise because I don't take it for granted.
Yeah.
And by the same token, let me get into quickly why Vietnam was a blessing to me.
Yeah, I would like to hear
I don't take I don't take flush toilets for granted, because I had to go without them for 14 months. I don't take warm showers for granted, because I didn't have those for 14 months. And most of all, I don't take life for granted. Ever since that experience, I have been feeling very blessed just to be alive. I'm amazed that I'll admit it, 71 years old now. I was 24, 25 then. Life itself is precious and short and fleeting, and an incredible blessing. And I wouldn't have that attitude, I think, if I hadn't been there. I think it gave me that attitude. I just feel enormously lucky to have served and to be alive. And why I feel lucky to have served, it turned out I was braver than I thought I was capable of being. A couple of moments that were, critical. I also turned out to have some abilities I didn't know I had, and the Army forced me to have those abilities. So,
give me an example.
Oh, stripping a weapon, putting it back together. I don't have any mechanical aptitude. I could do that. Climbing a horizontal ladder, which we had to do to get a meal. Just before the chow hall, you had to climb, go through a horizontal ladder, growling all the way, like you were some fierce. I'm not a fierce, aggressive person, but I could climb a horizontal ladder, like that. Anyway, it's and mainly just get along in the Army. I thought I was totally unfit for the military. That was not my kind of environment. It turned out I got several medals. I got promoted fast. I did well. And I guess the ultimate example is back in 2006, my wife said when I came home one day, "You have a call from somebody named Randy Lee." And I said, "I knew a Randy Lee in Vietnam, but I haven't seen him since 1968. And she said, "Well, here's the phone number." So I called him back, and it was the same Randy Lee. And in this internet computer age, he had looked me up and found out where I lived and called. And turned out he was organizing a reunion of guys in our unit. So eventually 6 of us ended up at my first sergeant's house in Texarkana, Texas. My first sergeant was a scary guy at the time. Now he's a teddy bear. But anyway, in my generation, men don't hug. Yep. Okay, we shake hands. I didn't even hug my dad till he was probably 80 years old, and we finally got around to it. We just shook hands all the time.
Right.
Anyway, my generation doesn't hug. Well, we hugged.
Yeah.
All 6 of us. We'd all been through the same thing, and we were all celebrating still being alive. And we all 6 had not much in common except for that experience. But that experience was enough, and it really brought us together. So that was a great moment in my life, and worth the trip.
Do you still get together?
We will again, probably in a couple of years.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you think that there were times when you thought to yourself, I might be one of those names in Stars and Stripes?
Yes. Yeah. We didn't picture the Vietnam Wall later on, but sure, I thought I could be one of those names. Okay. So even every day, when you might die that day, I discovered you don't sit around thinking grim thoughts. You just try to enjoy the moment as best you can. You enjoy breathing. You enjoy maybe telling a joke or two with somebody. Mm-hmm. You enjoy having them tell you about their family or the wife back home or whatever. It really forges a kind of camaraderie that wouldn't be there otherwise. So that circumstance doesn't have you thinking fatalistic thoughts. It just has you knowing that every day could be your last. But I'm aware of that now. I could die tomorrow.
Right.
I don't know. So
when you're a communications guy, what kind of communications besides you've got Stars and Stripes and Armed Forces Network? But what kind of communication personally do you have with family and friends while you're over there?
Well, back then it was primitive. There was no texting, no email.
Right.
Just letters. You wrote as often as you could, usually in longhand. My dad was always in the habit of typing, so that's fine. He'd write long letters that way. But just letters, that was it. That was the only way. There was you couldn't even call long distance.
Right.
I could call long distance from Hawaii, which I did one time, but not in Vietnam itself. So the only blessing there was that there was no postage required on letters. You could write, where you'd normally place a stamp, you just wrote the word free, and it got there.
Right.
But that was, yeah, letters were it.
Did you? They had to be worried. Did you tell them about the shrapnel incident? Did they know, or did
They got a telegram. The Army's policy, and probably all military units' policy, if you were wounded, your parents or next of kin got a telegram, and if you were killed, military people showed up at your door. So you didn't want soldiers showing up at your door, because their job was to inform you that your son was dead. My parents got a telegram, which is, again, seemingly now a very primitive way of communication. In fact, it doesn't exist anymore, as far as I know. But they got a telegram, and yeah, that was it.
That had a concern. That, I mean, obviously, did they ever tell you what their reaction was back home when they got notice?
They soft-pedaled it when they wrote to me, but when I got home, they said they were worried sick.
Yeah.
They had been. They didn't want me to worry about their worrying, at the time.
Right.
So I always thought, as bad as any job in Vietnam could be, and the worst job would be, say, infantry.
Right.
A worse job than that is having to be one of the soldiers who goes to people's houses to tell them their son has died. I can't imagine a worse job than having to break that kind of news and do it day after day after day. And even if it was a stateside safe job, it was heart-wrenching. I wouldn't. Worst possible job.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Did you have to pull guard duty? Did you have to do all the things that, even though you're back?
Oh yeah,
home?
actually, the only time I was due to, my unit was due to pull guard duty at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and they asked us a bunch of questions first of all, and I got them all correct, and they said, "Oh, you're the colonel's orderly." I said, "Great, what's that?" I didn't know what it was. Colonel orderly meant you got the night off. You didn't have to do guard duty because you were. Figure the logic of that. You're the most prepared to do guard duty well, so you don't have to. Okay.
See, this is that old civilian military mind.
Civilian mindset. So anyway, my parents got a nice letter saying your son was named colonel's orderly, and there were some other things. I got Soldier of the Month for my battalion in Vietnam just because I did my job well. And since I couldn't wait to get out of the service, naturally, when my son was born, after I'd been out of the Army for 4 years, I got talking to going to the Army Reserve because I had a hospital bill to pay and I needed extra money. So, but pretty soon that was an easy way to make some extra bucks for one weekend a month. So I stayed in the reserves for 6 years in a unit in Great Falls.
Did you? What is? This may be an odd question, but what's the happiest memory you have from Vietnam?
Leaving.
You're not the first person to say that, but let's talk about leaving. Let's go that way. So you stay on an extra. You take the gamble and say, I'm going to stay on another month and a half,
right?
Hoping that the Viet Cong are really bad shots,
right?
And so just to get out, so you survive that. And now you're going home. Tell me about
everybody talked about the Freedom Bird. Right, that was the ultimate trip. Long flights, always 18 hours both ways over the ocean. We got on the flight. They gave us warm washcloths to mop our heads with. And
is this a commercial flight?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Pan Am, which doesn't exist anymore, but they were the primary overseas carrier back then, and you got to see women.
Right.
Women, hey, women.
Right, period.
and good-looking ones dressed up, Back then, airlines still dared discriminate on the basis of looks.
Right,
okay,
yeah.
So all the magazines to read you wanted, whatever you needed for a drink. It was just a standard airplane flight, but it was, fantastic to have that civilian experience again after so much time in being in the military. I recall we landed in Oakland. There was a big sign that said, "Welcome home, soldier. Your country is proud of you." Well, your country wasn't proud of you, as it turned out. Your country was, a lot of people in the country thought you were the scum of the earth for going.
Tell me what that was. That had to be as nice as the moist washcloth, the warm washcloth was. This would have been the slap in the face.
But there were people. I went back to Missoula to finish my degree, and by then the campus had, this was the Earth Day quarter, also very first Earth Day, so they were into anti-war, environmental, various
That had to be a rough
various
environment.
left-wing things. And I was just trying to get my degree. I didn't care to get involved in any of that, so I really didn't tell them I was in Vietnam most of the time, except a few people knew. But and by then I was going back to radio, and radio was a countercultural phenomenon back then too. I mean,
'Cause you were going to early
AM
days,
top
yeah.
40 radio was nothing but anti-war songs, and Edwin Starr singing "War, what is it good for?" And that kind of. You remember it.
Yeah, yeah. So, how does a Vietnam guy fare in that environment with
You just
Country
shut
Joe
your
and the
mouth
Fish?
and do your homework.
Okay.
I was back on the GI Bill. I wasn't going to live on my dad's money anymore because I felt guilty about that. So as long as it was my own money paying my tuition, I took a shabby basement apartment and spent most of my time studying, and for a change got a decent GPA, which I hadn't always done before that. So I was glad to be back in the world, basically.
Yeah.
I could harbor some private resentments of people, and you always had to wonder how many of the anti-war people were doing so out of genuine conviction, and obviously the women were, because they weren't subject to being drafted, but how many males were doing it out of conviction and just out of fear that they might get drafted and killed. Same fear I had had 3 years earlier.
But
So yeah, I understand that.
yeah, what did you have? Was it hard picking up your life in the real world?
No, it was great. I was just appreciating everything I could do.
Yeah.
Loved wearing civilian clothes again. Loved having the freedom to go somewhere if I felt like it.
Yep.
No, it wasn't hard at all. I just picked right up.
Was it?
I don't have PTSD, put it that way.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fair enough. Did you coming back? Did people? Was there any ostensible change in you? Did
People said I'd lost a lot of weight, and I had probably 30 pounds, most of it water, and most of it from sweating all the time.
sandbags will do that?
Yeah,
to you.
and it didn't eat. I mean, we ate okay, but not terrifically. They told us in basic training that your object in eating was to get full, not to enjoy the meal.
They can suck the fun out of anything.
And to be healthy and that kind of stuff. No, I was glad I'd been in, and I was glad I was out.
Yeah. When you were in there, a lot of the vets that I've spoken with always said they could very easily finish the phrase, "When I get to the real world, I'm going to," because that was the conversation.
Right.
What was it for you?
In my case, I wanted to get back to broadcasting because I really had loved my career up to that point, and of course, I wanted to eventually find Ms. Right, get married, have kids, live.
Get on with your life.
And live the bourgeois life my parents had when I was growing up in Billings. So I really wanted to come back to Montana, which I did, and I wanted to come back to. I grew to like Great Falls, and I lived there, but I always wanted to come back to Billings, and finally got the chance to. So I've had the life I've wanted to. I know there are people who said, "Oh, you could have gone a lot further in the business in a big city and made a huge amount more money," and probably the same stuff you hear as an editor. Why are you editing the Gazette when you've got the capability of editing the Washington Post or something? But this is where I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Looking back on the war now with the hindsight of history, how do you look at it now?
I look at it as our country having good intentions, being extremely well-meaning, and probably being wrong. It's a little tough to be the only part of the only war we've lost, and I was a little bit distressed at how easily we seem to give up. Back by the time we lost it in 1975, the whole country was tired of the war, and the politicians were tired of either defending it or attacking it. They just wanted it to be over, as did the citizenry. So it was an unfortunate episode in American history. It's too bad. I think I'm hardcore enough, I suppose, to think we could have won it.
You're not even. I'm not sure that I've had one veteran tell me differently.
Really? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll put it this way. I think my judgment might be clouded because I went to college in Wisconsin and I graduated from U of M, but I consider the Army to be my alma mater, my real alma mater, the one that taught me the most and the one that did me the most good. And so it's possible that you know, I swallowed their argument for the war. They would give us some, you know, there'd be some propaganda sessions in AIT or basic about why we're there and what we hope to do. And, you know, and if you listen to your anti-war friends back home, they're saying the exact opposite. So it turns out, do you choose to believe your possibly misguided friends, or do you choose to believe the official line?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know, hard to say. I think to answer your original question, a bit of misguided good intentions with tragic results a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
In '75, you were married, you had children,
Right.
and Vietnam, Saigon had fallen in late '74, I believe. If I'm not
I think it was 75. I'm not
75.
sure.
Saigon
Okay.
falls. What does that do to you? I mean, you're well into your other part of your life now.
Yeah.
But what is that?
Tragic. Too bad. Well, and I thought about all the people who had been employed by American forces who became friends of mine. You know, in the course of my daily duties, they're the people who washed my clothes and stuff like that. I thought, what's going to happen to them? Those are the people who went to all the re-education camps and who were shunned by their own society after that. And the reason they had worked for the Americans was not because they were political, but because they needed to make a living, and that was the way to make one. So it was tragic. And I saw those pictures of Americans on board helicopters and Vietnamese trying to climb aboard as Saigon's being evacuated. And you know, there's one picture of an American soldier slugging a Vietnamese guy on the jaw. A guy who's trying to board the helicopter, and he's trying to keep him off because the helicopter's too crowded already. The biggest tragedy is, well, obviously the 57,000 American lives lost, but a whole lot of Vietnamese lives tragically ended as well, or at least had to abruptly change. Yeah. Too bad. Too bad.
That you were fighting when you were in Vietnam. You're also fighting down and correct me if I'm wrong, in the Mekong Delta, you're fighting a lot of Viet Cong.
Yeah.
You're friends by day, enemies by night.
Yes, exactly.
Does that make it hard? Not just the you don't know whether you're a friend or an enemy, but you're not really fighting an army as in
no, actually, I think I realized the best thing you could do in your association with them was try to be as pleasant as possible. Because maybe they'd feel less inclined to want to kill you later on, so there's an ulterior motive behind your kindness. But more than that, to see people of all races and all ethnicities as human beings with the same aspirations and dreams that you have. I was really bothered by some of my fellow soldiers who would always refer to the Vietnamese as gooks. You know, it's a slur word, similar to the N-word in our language. You know, and as far as a few guys were concerned, they were all gooks. You know, that's no way to fight a war, and that's no way to get along with other people.
Yeah.
But it's in your own interest as a human being to be kind to other people. And that includes people who might be your enemies by night. Maybe it'll change their minds.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Here I am waxing philosophical, and it's probably not my place to do that.
Actually, I would disagree. I think this is, as someone who's seen that and understands, that's when human nature and human interaction, I think, are probably their most basic and bare. I mean, if you can't learn it there, then you don't have probably a lot of hope for the rest.
Yeah, I think it helps to be elderly like I am now, and you realize that most people going through life are just doing the best they can with the information they have available.
So did your experience over there, you've talked about just daily making you appreciate flush toilets, hot showers, things like that. Did it help you professionally to have done that, to be over in Vietnam?
I think so. I think going through life with an attitude of gratitude is just beneficial no matter where you are. You know, I think even in my professional life, I mean, it's a running joke that broadcasters in Montana don't make very much money, and you either have to choose to leave the state or leave the business, one of the two. And I chose to stay with both, and I learned how to be content with what I had. I think the Army was probably helpful in that respect. I think I came to the attitude even if we don't make as much money as we want to, the guy who signs the front of my check is my friend.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
So I think, and this is not to say that all broadcasting managers are crazy about Dave Rye, because a couple distinctly are not. But I've tried, at least in my retirement years, to formulate that kind of frame of mind and just be grateful for the friends I've got, the career I had, the life I have, and whatever number of years I still have remaining. It's just, you know, it's a marvelous adventure. Life itself is. I'm just thrilled that I, you know, could have lost it almost 50 years ago, and still have it. It's just
that's a great. Do people ask you a lot about your Vietnam?
hardly at all. You're a rarity.
Well,
it's one reason why I appreciate this series, because most people, they say, "Oh, you were there," and "Oh, that's nice," and let's change the subject.
Right.
So it doesn't really come up.
You spending a career in media, you've probably seen a lot about what's been written or filmed about Vietnam. Are there particular movies, portrayals that you say, okay, that rings true?
What a good question. You know, I really can't stand to watch a Vietnam movie.
Okay.
I don't know why. I don't know if I've ever. I have not. I mean, I've read reviews of all of them.
Sure.
I have not seen Platoon in its entirety. I've not seen Apocalypse Now at all. I haven't seen, what's the one about the Marine Corps? Whatever.
That's right.
Anyway, and there are 4 or 5 other ones, and they all portray, I know The Deer Hunter was one, Coming Home was another, Born on the 4th of July.
Yep.
All of them had a Hollywood negative vision of American and American soldiers. You know, the axiom for all those movies is that our government is evil, and our country our country probably is as well, and that we ought to be ashamed of ourselves for being so rich and successful compared to most other nations. I find that a thoroughly objectionable point of view, and I don't want to watch the movies because of that. Full Metal Jacket's the one I was trying to think of. I've seen portions of that one. All of them tend to be, I guess, extreme in their violence. They tend to be extreme in their profanity, which I hope I got over decades ago. They tend to be extreme in their almost an anti-American point of view about a lot of things. I think our country is intrinsically just and good, and the viewpoint of those movies is that our country is intrinsically evil, and we need to apologize to other nations in the world for all the things that we are. I thoroughly reject that point of view, and if that makes me a hopeless right-winger and an anomaly among media people, so be it.
No,
Okay.
I don't necessarily believe that.
Okay.
What's the so you're also an interesting thing too. You're in radio, and I'm a great music lover. I got my start in radio too because I've got a face for radio. Thankfully, you had a face for television. But one of the things that I think drew me to it at once, I don't think anymore, was the music in
Yes.
Vietnam for all the turbulence, and there was some turbulent music too.
And there was great music.
There was some great music. What do you remember about the music, and are there songs that either were an anthem or take you back to that moment in your life?
I loved the radio at the time, the music. This was my radio time was the time of the British invasion.
Right.
Basically, Beatles, Herman's Hermits, Rolling Stones. Liked some of it, didn't like others, but always exciting. Paul Revere and the Raiders were probably the primary American act at the time. It was fun music. A lot of it was good times, and oddly enough, the music was usually relentlessly cheerful, as contrasted to the war, which relentlessly wasn't. One movie I did sit all the way through was Good Morning Vietnam, the Robin Williams one about the disc jockey in Vietnam. And of course, I was an avid radio listener. I was hoping I'd get a radio job there, but no such luck. I got artillery instead. But Robin Williams was like the guy I heard who followed that character, you know, in the real Vietnam.
Right.
And he'd always start every morning at 6 a.m., 0600. With good morning, you know, and the good would last about 35 seconds or as long as he could hold his breath. Music was good. You know, in Vietnam, they didn't play the real anti-war songs. I mean, this is Armed Forces Radio.
Right.
They,
So no Barry McGuire, Eve
no
of
Barry
Destruction.
McGuire, no Eve of Destruction, no Edwin Starr's War Song.
Right.
But we heard most of the rest of them, even the supposedly countercultural ones.
Right.
In fact, the tough thing about serving in the military at the time was, with the whole country going countercultural, you felt really out of it, having short hair.
Right.
You know, or not being able to dress in all the cool styles that were coming along, and,
Right.
you know, all that sort of thing. So, again, mixed feelings. But the music was good.
Yeah.
I still play it.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think? One of the reasons I'm doing this, and that I believe in this project, and of course, I would hope that.
Obviously, you do. This interview
Yeah.
lasted about half an hour longer than I expected.
Well, I'm sorry. No, this.
No,
and I would tell you it's a little under even right now at this point where most of them.
I'm glad to talk about it.
But one of the things that I'm really hopeful is that this isn't just important for 2015, or that this won't be useful, but in 2065, when another 50 years is marked, and you may still be around. I don't know that I will, the way I'm going.
If I am, I'll be 122.
Well, that's good.
Probably not.
Well, maybe advances in medical science.
Yeah, you never know.
But there may not be people around, and probably won't be, to say, here's what it was like. What do you hope people remember 50 years from now?
I hope they remember that soldiers always had good intentions, that they sometimes went against their will, but they did because they were told to and because they thought it was the right thing to do. I hope they'll remember that regardless of what their political feelings were, that they were almost invariably brave, and that they were well-intentioned. I think the American soldier represents our country very well, including now. The soldiers who've been to Iraq have wanted primarily to serve their country and to protect it from its perceived enemies. So I hope that they'll remember that. I hope they'll forget all the slurs that were directed against military people during the Vietnam War, which were totally unjustified. And I hope we'll move on to a peaceful and prosperous world.
Yeah. You said something that I just have to come back to.
Okay.
So it was you said, I found out I was braver than I thought I was. Give me an example. How did that work?
When you're being mortared, you don't have time to be fearful. You only have time to seek shelter and to retaliate, with your own guns, and that kind of thing. You get time to get scared later, but while it's happening, it doesn't happen. And there are other nights when we anticipated attacks happening, but they didn't, but we stayed awake all night thinking they were bound to. Even then, I felt, to my own surprise, a kind of a cold steel internal resolve. Didn't think of myself as that kind of guy. I'd seen the Sands of Iwo Jima when I was a little kid, and I wasn't that kind of soldier,
right,
or that kind of Marine in that case. So I surprised myself with that. But you do all kinds of things you didn't think you were capable of if you're forced to do them, which is the whole purpose of basic training, probably.
Yeah, yeah. So. It's also good to hear. It's good to hear that I didn't think I could do it, but did do it. That's a common theme, because I don't think anybody really knew what they had in store for them.
I would not have volunteered for it.
Right.
But I'm glad in retrospect that I was volunteered.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Did your father, being a military man, when you came back, what was that like?
My dad had been stateside Navy, and he had a college degree, so he was a paper guy. Okay. I remember my drill sergeant in basic training always speaking with contempt of the paper army. And he pointed out that no matter what your military job was, basically you're an infantryman. You might think you're a cook or you might think you're a paper pusher, but you're an infantryman. My dad, like me, did what he had to. at the time. He had a wife and a newborn son, me, when he was in the Navy, and a newborn daughter before the war was over. And he did the best he could and did his job as well as he could and went back to civilian life, which I suppose is my story as well.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah. It's probably a fool's errand to try to say, I'm going to take these 2 years, really intense years, where you saw so much, and really your life story, and I'm going to boil it down into this narrow band of time. What have I missed that's important to tell about your story, Dave?
You really covered the gamut.
Good.
You did very well.
Thank you.
Let's see, what haven't I mentioned? Oh, I could go on forever. I think, I guess one thing I'll emphasize in closing is just the sort of camaraderie you feel with other soldiers. I mentioned those guys who got together in Texarkana, Arkansas, who hadn't had much in common before we were in the service together, and we didn't have much in common in our lives afterwards. But we all had that common chord connecting us all together. And I recall a funny moment when we started gathering, telling war stories. Our first sergeant's wife said, our wives were with us. Our first sergeant's wife said, "Ladies, let's adjourn to the kitchen." So they did. And we all had Vietnam to talk about. They had seemingly nothing in common. They'd never met before, and they probably wouldn't see each other again. But they had no problem with conversation at all, which I think shows some kind of basic difference between women and men.
Right.
Right. But anyway, in retrospect, glad I served. I would do it again.
Yeah.
Even knowing in advance the result.
Yeah.
I would do it again. It was an honorable thing to do. And even if I was forced into doing the honorable thing, I'm glad I was forced into it.
I can't end on a better line than that, other than to say thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for agreeing.
Thanks for asking.
You bet. And then also thank you for doing that. Thank you for. I understand it was for one person. One of the vets said I take no thanks because I was forced to do it, but I said still that and thank you for what you did. I do appreciate that.
You bet.
This has been Vietnam Voices, a project of the Billings Gazette, and I've been with Dave Rye.